Hey everybody, in a rare event of going outside, just over a week ago I went drifting, just a little bit, and I got about 10 minutes roughly of actual drift time in 3 different cars. So first there was an E36 BMW with effectively slick rear tires, which was a simple zigzaggy course. I think I did about 6 runs of 20 seconds in that. Slowly got a feel for it, went fairly, there was an upwards trend. Then in the afternoon there was another car, E46 BMW, also with somewhat slick tires, so a few runs in that, in second gear on a wet skid pad, and then Remco destroyed the rear tires, which is a good thing to do. So then some new tires went on, so effectively the third car is the same car but with newer rear tires with everything remaining. So we had to go back to first gear in order to have enough torque to break the car loose. So effectively 3 different cars, a few minutes in each variant. So it was really just scratching the surface, just getting a feel roughly for drifting. By no means making me an expert. However, it went fairly well, I must say. Slowly got the hang of it. You start to feel, do you do sudden inputs? They don't really work. You have to have them a bit more time on the throttle before the E36 broke loose. We weren't allowed to clutch kick it. There were no handbrakes in any of these cars. So you got used to that a little bit. And then, of course, looking where you're going. And then, do you trust the wheel? It turned out, yes, you can kind of trust the wheel quite well. It's quick enough for rotation. The second car, the E46, had no power steering or more or less broken power steering. But once you get going, it worked fine. So the beauty was that once it started to click, even though this was on my 6th minute of real life drifting, it just felt like, yeah, done this before, hours of this, more or less identical in the sim. It was a very, very sort of emotional, beautiful feeling that I've been doing physics and sim racing. It's not really a hobby, maybe it's a passion, but it's also been an obsession over all these 15 years of modding. Slowly learning a thing or two, making mistakes and making spreadsheets, making sims, game stock car, Automobilista mods, videos about tires and everything. So even though it is a hobby in a way, it's a bit too serious at times. It's nice to have confirmation, that is very hard to explain when you're out there and you're going sideways and you have that feeling of having done it before, even though I haven't. There was a very, very, very beautiful feeling, sort of a confirmation of that the last 15 years of hobby obsession, somewhere in between those. They weren't just nonsense, and it all works very closely to what I expected it to. Of course, it took a few minutes to get used to, and I'm by no means a pro, and I'm not hitting like centimeter accuracy, but this is just a few minutes. And for a 40-something-year-old man, taking a few minutes to learn something is acceptable in my book. So, beautiful experience, even though it was such a limited time to get that. It snapped, it clicked, it was the same that I always do. I will go back to the sim and see if I can make the car a bit more close to what we drove with the worn out tires and with the better rear tires. Will be interesting. But for now, let's just remove my head and look at the back of my head. I have some neck hair that I had to get rid of, I see there, but that's not what's important. Now let's see how I did. Bit of a clutch kick, very easy to get it out with a clutch kick, and then just quite a lot of throttle because we are in first gear with the sticky tires and the lack of power. It sort of had to happen. So there's a lots of revs, but the wheel spin isn't that huge because we are in first gear. And then it was just a matter of looking where I was going and having the confidence that the steering would do all the opposite lock. And then it's just a balancing, and it was a great feeling that I could narrow a radius or open a corner. And here I almost lose the slide, but I give it turn in and more throttle, and then it came again. It all just felt quite logical. Not to be bragging, but I don't think there were that many runs. And I murdered the cameraman, sorry about that. I don't think there were a huge amount of runs by inexperienced people that managed to keep the drift going all the way through the lap, all the way through the little track. But of course, you could argue that having been a physics sort of person and having many hours in the sim doesn't make me inexperienced, but that's was the nice thing to have been proven here. So clutch kick, so easy, instantly comes, and with let's make a face. What's interesting in the E36, where we maybe weren't allowed to do a clutch kick, that it worked just fine with the slick rear tires, keeping some throttle, and then after half a second, after a second, took a while and then it came. It was definitely not, and that's something that is easy to do, sometimes do in a sim for various reasons, because everything is so stiff, maybe in AMS as well, depending on how you model everything. It's something I'm actually getting into now, that the instant you press the throttle, if you have enough torque, it's almost like a clutch kick. Which I've managed to avoid now with my sim model, but in real life everything sort of judders and wobbles, and maybe there is some electronics on the engine stopping the instant torque, so that didn't work as instantly as you might sometimes expect in the sim. It was more like, okay, half throttle and then half a second, and then the E36 stepped out eventually. But this clutch kick in the E46 is just super simple to do, and only like slight balancing of, you not have to be on the red line as much, it's just not be on the red line, but enough to give it a sudden spin and then you got going. I'm a little hesitant here because of course this is like my 4th or 5th run in with these tires in this car in first gear. So I'm not at the limit of absolute angle, and because I want to keep some margin, I'm not really sure, this being my 4th run, how violent it will come. So but it went quite well, and here was sort of a late apex. Small corrections, probably mostly unnecessary, just feeling it out. Here I was expecting a more violent transition, but it was quite okay with the grippy rear tires, with the thread. You know, it didn't come too quickly. Here at really low speed, I was close to the lock stops. This is a nice angle, and then again it's fairly sluggish in its transition with the rear tires being grippy. This one was tricky. Easy to spin it out here, but this run I managed it. So by no means on the absolute limit. A little bit of caution, but I did a couple of runs without losing the drift. So again, also quite different from the second gear runs, because the thing is, you hear me with lots of wheel spin, but near the ref limiter here. But keep in mind, we are in first gear, and wheel spin is the speed of the tires versus the speed of the car. So if I'm doing 20 kilometers an hour and I have wheel spin for 40 kilometers an hour, I have like 100% wheel spin. But of course in second gear, if I do 6,000 revs, I have a lot more wheel speed if I'm going the same speed on the track than in first gear. And that changes the grip of the tires a bit. So it seems like I'm on the limit of super wheel spin, but since we were in first gear, the amount of wheel spin wasn't as much as in second gear. And I think that actually made it a bit more controllable, because the more wheel spin you have, the less cornering grip the rear tires have. And it becomes an act of playing with the wheel spin, controls your rear grip to some extent, and then with the steering, balancing it a bit. It's just like in the sim, and it felt really quite logical. So every time I let go of the throttle, regained some grip, and here it is in the transitions that felt easier in a way than I would have expected, because I think the steering just kept up more than what I predicted in my simulator with slightly sluggish steering. It was a bit slower than the car. Turned out to be no problem at all. I don't know if it's broken power steering or with power steering would have been the same. The steering had no problem keeping the car, like the tires pointing in the way the car was sliding, which is what the self-aligning torque and the caster angle and stuff should do, but they kept up easily. So I was expecting a more violent transition. So here I'm going from quite a bit of wheel spin, and then I'm sort of trying to get the momentum. So yeah, how do you explain that? That's the thing. I just did it because I did it before, something like that, right? So when you go from that, and then by lifting, you also transfer a bit of weight to the front, and then the back swung around, not as quickly as I thought. So here I sort of have the bungee cord that way, and then it just felt fairly controllable and easy to do. And I had a big grin on my face. It's pretty hard to explain because it just came so naturally in a relatively short time. Again, guys, I'm not like millimeter accuracy pro drifter, some teenager who gets in and does it the first run. I had no intention of, oh, you see bad teeth and a smile, I think, yep, that's me. So yeah, I don't know what else to do. Let's look at the run one more time, and I'm just really happy I got a chance to do a few minutes of this. That unique feeling of having sort of justification of all the time and the frustration and the rewards and the joy and then sometimes the pain of 15 years of sim racing and physics and all that stuff, to just turn up and relatively be okay at this. Again, not a pro, but just, do this. It's about as good as I could have expected it to go. So yeah, great experience. Let's have the look at the run one more time, and then we'll do the goodbyes. To the cones. Yes. And so, well, that was an interesting experience. Maybe you enjoyed watching me not suck in real life for a change and going outside. So that was that. Thanks for watching. Leave your comments below if you have any. And I think this should be done at some point in the future again, but that first sort of justification of the hobby, that it's sensible and it makes sense and the sim works, that was just an amazing feeling that you cannot reproduce. It's a one-time thing. Of course, I can get better at this, and maybe we'll do it at some time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.